Welcome to the Daily Plunge. We are in the book of Job, chapter 34, verses 1 through 15. And then we pick up again at verse 34 through chapter 35, the whole chapter, verse 16. Now, Elihu says to those gathered, you hear me, you wise men. You hear what the words I'm saying. Remember, Elihu is saying that he speaks by the Spirit of God. And he says in verse 5 that Job accuses God of denying him justice. Job says, I'm right, I'm guiltless, and I haven't sinned. And Elihu actually has granted him, perhaps you didn't sin in the past. You were faithful before, but now you crossed the line. Job has sinned by his words. And Elihu says, now you're running with a pack of wicked scoffers, as it says, and you have denounced God, denounced even taking delight in God. In verse 12, Elihu says, that it's unthinkable that God would do wrong. He's saying, what audacity it is for Job to declare that God is evil. And that's exactly what we hear today in our world, where people declare that God is evil and wicked. But Elihu makes the point is that God repays man for what humanity does. And that if it was up to God, he could withdraw the breath of all of creation. God Almighty cannot pervert justice because he's the source of it. He doesn't ask permission from somebody else to run the world, right? As it says in verse 13, who tells him he has authority? He is the authority. The very notion of justice comes from God. If there is no God, there is no justice. So he goes on in chapter 35, and he says, Job asks, well, what's the benefit of being good? What's the benefit, the advantage of being just? Why bother being godly? And as we get down to verse 5, he says, if you sinned, what do you give? What do you give to God? If you're good, what do you give to God? He said, you can sin all you want. It affects only you. It doesn't damage God. It's impossible for the sin of this world, the wickedness of this world, to impact him. He will take care of it. Yeah, on the other hand, he says you can be good all you can, but you will never put God in a position where he owes you anything. It's impossible for our good works to ever measure up to God. I mean, we do our good works. How does that compare with the work of God on the cross? It doesn't, right? And then we get down to verse 9. He says, a multitude of people cry out under oppression. And they ask, where is God my maker? And they're calling for help. They're calling for relief, right? And then it says, verse 12, he does not answer because of their arrogance, because of their pride. And he says that their prayers are empty talk. They're worthless and unbelieving because they're not seeking God. Again, they're only seeking what God can give them. And it's this whole idea that so often our prayers are about what God can give rather than actually seeking to receive God himself in our lives, because we treat God as our butler to serve our self-actualization. We don't seek God for God's sake. And so the empty cries of suffering, we're asking how God can fix it instead of seeking God in the midst of that pain, just like Jesus sought his Father on the cross. Thanks, friends. Have a blessed day.